Hi everyone and welcome to the Astrology and Self-Esteem Part 2. And I've chosen to talk, because I'm talking in aspects, so I've decided to talk about the aspect Mars-Neptune. And we'll start with a quote from two great astrologers. One is Sue Tompkins of her great work in her book Aspects in Astrology. And she says a very good way for people to use Mars-Neptune hard contacts is for them to fight consciously on behalf of the underdog in some way. This is hardly surprising that these contacts are common in charts of social workers and the like. The Mars-Neptune person, real strength lies in their sensitivity, compassion, and imagination. Because we're talking about two archetypal principles. Neptune's all about transcendence and sensitivity, whereas Mars is more passion, warlike, and libido. Mars is the Martian aspects allows us the ability to assert ourselves. So when we can't assert ourselves properly, most people, when they don't assert themselves, usually don't have much self-esteem or not adequate self-esteem. And so what Neptune does is Neptune loves dissolving boundaries. And when the boundaries around Mars, because Mars with that assertion, that masculine principle, the anima, when it really hones in and is, say, in its domain in Aries, they're very confronting, they're very direct, so to speak. And we all know Mars is retrograde at the moment in Aries, which makes the Martian energy closer to its source. It doesn't deny the Martian energy, so to speak, when it's retrograde, but what it does, it requires it to be, the Martian energy to be challenged through a focused lens. So, Stephen Arroyo, in his great book, which I personally think is one of the best books to read on astrology, particularly I read it quite a few times when I was studying and starting out. His quote on this aspect is great. He says that in its most positive expression, Mars-Neptune, this combination can indicate that the person has the ability to act on his or her conscious ideals, to intuit a far-off possibility, to actualize a distant vision, whether in worldly achievements or in spiritual aspirations. At its worst, this combination is expressed as action motivated by fears or subconscious desires, as complete self-delusion about what one really wants. Because Mars is all about understanding what we want. When we don't understand what we want, then we don't know how to actually manifest or get to what we really need in life. Mars is about our passion. So when we lack passion, we're not going to be able to drive towards our fulfillment. So it's a very sensitive aspect, and it doesn't indicate that anyone with a Mars-Neptune aspect will not have self-esteem. What it does mean in my books is it creates a highly sensitive person. And we live in an age now where sensitivity, empathy, compassion is pretty much obliterated. But sensitivity is not a weakness. It's actually a real strength if we understand how to harness it. One of the downsides of the Neptunian aspect is can create a lot of confusion. Confusion about the self, confusion about our own masculinity, particularly in men, because Mars represents men. And males who do have this aspect are quite softer in nature. They're not as fiery like the Martian energy is not so strong. They're not so direct. They're more refined and sensitive and compassionate. And I think there's a few keywords we need to look into here, because I think the keywords are really critical just to get a bit of a flavor for the aspects of the shadow side and the potential side, like I did in the last podcast on this. And these are actually all my keynotes. What I'm talking about here is when I went through my astrological study, I made a lot of keynotes about these planets. And I think and I kind of always reflect back on these, because after doing charts on a lot of people over the years, things come into fruition. You get different realizations about these aspects. They're not just something written down on paper. They're more active through the process of your consultations with patients. So the shadow side of Mars Neptune is a weak father, or it can be a sensitive father. Feeling that men in your life are unreliable, because Neptune rules escape mechanisms as well. So maybe men aren't around as much, or they are around in your life, but they appear to be somewhere else, either aloof or in their own world, maybe drunk or just glued to TV or in their own fantasy world. It can indicate no strong men in your life. It can definitely indicate confusion about the masculinity. Disillusioned with men. It can indicate weak will, because remember, Mars represents the will. And Neptune's all about idolization, so you can idolize the sexual experience. Surrendering to your physical impulses for better or worse. Weak physical boundaries. Inability to say no. We let people just come in and walk all over us. That's what Neptune's about when it dissolves boundaries. It doesn't allow us to actually assert ourselves. We can become too altruistic. Can never say no to anyone, which means we can actually end up draining our own our own resources. And when that happens, we end up burning out. This is one of these aspects that can burn out very easily. On a medical level, we can it could also leach our iron levels. Mars rules irons, our iron levels. So it rules iron as a metal, so we can become deficient, become anemic. So that inability to know is very important around this aspect. There's also acting like a martyr. People can be very spaced out with this aspect. Asserting ourselves in a chaotic manner or unfocused energy. So we're scattered, not direct. Diffused, permeable energy. Having no idea what to do next. Living in this kind of the old Neptunian haze. Difficult at accessing personal willpower. Not being able to focus and tune into our own will. Putting yourself last, and which is a classic self-esteem issue. Acute physical sensitivity, this aspect can give us. Neptune really heightens the physical senses to the point where, it can be very sensitive to energies that other people would have no idea in the world about. This aspect can also indicate dulling your senses as a way to cope with anger. Using drugs, alcohol, sex, or anything to drift out of reality rather than deal with our own anger. Delusional behavior. And remember, Mars represents the anger, and Neptune gives us the inability to actually harness it. But the thing is, when we actually honestly process and feel emotion, this is when clarity of the mind takes place. People who cannot focus and are extremely scattered usually completely disown their emotions and have no understanding how to sanitize the psyche. So Arthur Yanoff was one of the greatest when it came to the primal therapy for this kind of thing, because the more you process and clean out your own house, the more incredibly focused you are in terms of understanding your goals, your selfhood, and self-esteem. And this aspect demands it. You need to create a little bit more homework for yourself on this subject when you have these Mars-Neptune hard aspects. There can be an indistinct sense of direction, because Mars indicates direction. Pervasive lust, sexual fantasy, and codependent relationships with this. So that's the shadow aspect of those. And we all have the ability to process it. We just need to understand. This is one of the great things about Astro. It can give you the key aspects that we have to work with to transform our own selves to become who, like in Lord of the Rings, become who you're born to be. So the potential of this Mars-Neptune aspect is, because it's a deeply spiritual one, so putting energy into the spiritual. Neptune rules the mystical side of life, so there can be deep motivation to understanding the mystic, the mythical, chi, prana, qigong, tai chi, these kind of exercises. It can indicate the sensitive man, the spiritual man who transcend the normal ideas of what it means to be masculine. Because masculinity is not all about beefing you up and, walking around with a samurai sword and, being warrior like that. Neptune Mars aspect can be the spiritual warrior. Compassion and action. Acting with sensitivity. Asserting your own ideal visions. Acting on ideals. Championing the underdog. Fighting for the underdog. Fighting for the people who are getting shafted from a bullying government that we have at the moment, who's just looking to rape and pillage absolutely everything off everyone. This is when the Mars Neptune in its positive sense can fight for the underdog. Asserting your imagination. Neptune rules the imagination. It rules sleep, the dream life, symbolic language, poetry, the word. The courage to let go, the courage to act on behalf of a higher power. Using energy for a higher cause. Actions that serve a higher purpose. Spiritual sexuality. Self-sacrificing not in an altruistic way. Not to the point where you burn out and you're no good to anyone and yourself. Spiritual energy. Refined, delicate energy. Action. Actions that are dictated by other realms and otherworldly experiences. Which is so Neptunian. Being able to tune into another vibration. And these worlds do exist. Any Neptunian person will be highly, highly tuned into them. It's literally impossible to even bring that down to the material world with our bankrupt, materialistic, nihilistic, medieval consciousness mess we're in at the moment. Selfless efforts, finding a spiritual path that helps you release anger, which is important for a Neptunian Mars aspect, of ways of finding how to channel and deal with their anger. They'll do it in different ways. Releasing energy through imagination and dream life experiencing. releasing energy through meditation and active meditation, which is important because Neptune, Mars is all about, can rule that. The meditation is more the mystical realm. Dealing with forces that other people have trouble seeing and recognizing. Psychic energy, prana. One of the positive things, these people can really read into these kind of fields, which are very important and completely glazed over by the status quo. So I find this aspect is incredibly sensitive. It's a very sensitive aspect, and that Mars-Neptune part of us is important for us. I think one of the life lessons for these people is to learn about boundaries and how to assert their own boundaries so they don't get walked all over, and bring in some kind of active mystical side into their lives. So thanks for listening, and we'll do further podcasts on the astrology and self-esteem, because self-esteem, in my opinion, is one of the most important things for our time, because people who have adequate self-esteem, we will never get shafted the way we have been from the powers that be. So thanks for listening.